I feel like, that's how I feel. See and actually feel is like this. I feel...
Which is quite disappointing. In my last video, we reacted to Cleo Abrams' video about recycling of nuclear waste, and ever since you guys have been asking me to check out the video of Johnny Harris, who is another journalist who has been working with Cleo on this project. And in his video titled "What the Fish Fingers Happened to Nuclear Energy," he is examining the subject from a different angle than that of Cleo, and we're gonna be checking it out today. So without further ado, let's get into it.
The power of the atom was bringing peace and prosperity, abundance. But then, nuclear turned from darling to outcast.
There has been a nuclear accident in the Soviet Union.
A state of emergency in 2 of the country's nuclear reactors.
The worst nuclear reactor accident to date.
Today, nuclear power is in decline. And I've been trying to understand why. Why, in an era of climate crisis caused by fossil fuels, are we winding down this effective carbon-free energy?
Wait, too quick. I didn't have time to look at the graph.
Are we winding down?
Okay, so the graph is nuclear share, which has been declining. Nuclear electricity production in 2021, for the first time in some 4 decades, the share of nuclear power drops below 10%. I wonder where, so he has a document in which he has all the references that he's using. So let's go ahead and check that. And that's in 2 minutes into the video. And there's no reference associated with this. That's interesting. Okay, but there is something down here. Michael Schneider Consulting. Who is Michael Schneider Consulting? Michael Schneider is a Paris-based nuclear energy consultant and anti-nuclear activist. Interesting how you're making supposedly an objective video about nuclear power and you're citing a source that's anti-nuclear. Okay, so the organization or company of Michael Schneider, in their graph, cite the IAEA, which is the International Atomic Energy Agency. But interestingly enough, Johnny decides to cite Michael instead of IAEA, whose initial, let's say, work that is. And if we go to the IAEA report, here we can see for the world that, yes, of course, there is a decline, and we all know why that is, especially after the Fukushima accident. There's been a decade or so, a little bit more than that, that nuclear has been declining because people were afraid of these accidents to repeat and were either shutting down the reactors or temporarily shutting them down in order to figure out how they can make them safer or advance into some new technology that would make safer the use of nuclear energy. And that, of course, takes time. And, of course, throughout this time, the decline happened. So that's important to know the context. Still interesting why this reference was not cited in the reference document that Johnny is presenting. So I googled something here, an interview that he gave, and said every euro invested in nuclear power makes the climate crisis worse. This doesn't sound like the most objective way to discuss about nuclear, I would say. Most certainly a source I would double think before citing in a video that's supposed to be objective representation of what happened to nuclear power. Well, let's keep going. I'm gonna hold my horses for now. Yeah, however, note to Harris, this, if you're using this graph and you already have a document with the references, you might as well put that reference there. If you don't, then it just raises questions.
Here's the plan. I'm going to go down the rabbit hole on why people are afraid of nuclear energy.
Why people are afraid of nuclear energy is quite straightforward. I think even people know why they're afraid of nuclear energy, let alone journalists. It's because of the accidents, mostly because of Chernobyl accident and Fukushima accident and the potential of a future accident, plus associated with the lack of knowledge and deeper understanding of nuclear and its dangers. So in that case, I wouldn't play it that surprised as to I don't know what really happened with nuclear since it's such an efficient source, so why don't we use it? We know why. But I'm interested to see how they are approaching this. Let's see.
We went deep in this on very different sort of aspects of nuclear energy, but we agreed upon 3 major buckets that are the reasons we believe that nuclear has not sort of become the promise of the future.
So I'm curious, these are 2 very well-known journalists and versed in their fields since they have such a big following. So they dug into this subject, into this issue for 4 weeks straight. So I would expect some substantial information to come up since this is a quite long video. If I had to guess what they came up with in terms of what the problems of the nuclear is, definitely one of those, the number one probably would be the accidents. As I said before, since this is the biggest kind of reason why people are so hesitant about it.
Let's call them nuclear's 3 big problems, and they are accidents, waste, and cost. You understand these 3, and you really understand nuclear's big issue or nuclear's big solutions. I want to start with accidents.
It's interesting, though, I expected them to mention accidents, as I said before. However, waste, okay, it's an important one. Also, people don't have a lot of knowledge about it. It is scary. It can be very dangerous if you don't know how to treat it and store it properly. Cost is an issue. I see that it's more of a bigger issue when it comes to countries deciding energy policies and not so much to the individuals, because when something is portrayed as efficient, as better for the environment and in terms of energy production, and it produces a denser energy and it's a better form than others, or at least we need it at the moment, then people seem to agree to subsidize it, to pay for it. Taxpayers' money are given for projects to develop renewable energies such as solar, such as wind, that don't have the highest efficiency. However, we heavily pay on researching them, hence why they are so cheap to use. And the same thing is not really happening with nuclear. So the way I see it is not that much that nuclear is expensive. Of course it's expensive if no one is funding its R&D, but it's as much as how you present it to the people who have the capability to fund it, making them not really want to do that.
Because accidents really are, I think, the biggest, most powerful thing in our popular imagination of why nuclear is scary.
Totally.
When you think of nuclear power plants, at least for me, I thought of like Chernobyl. Radiation is this really weird invisible thing that like you can't see, but like suddenly if you're exposed to it in high doses, it can start to like break down the very building blocks of your cells.
So of course this is another thing that is very closely associated with nuclear, is radiation, and not so much knowledge around it creates fear and creates resistance against the use of nuclear power. And in that case, it is my belief that it is up to the industry itself, to the nuclear industry, to be more open, to educate people, to provide knowledge, so everybody has informed decisions made for themselves and for the countries they live in, and not decisions based on fear and lack of knowledge.
You have this public opinion poll here in the United States that asks Americans if they think we should use nuclear at all. Not like, should it be the #1 source or should we invest in it? It's, should we even use it as one of our sources? And look, almost 50% of people don't think we should even have it at all. Like, we should do away with nuclear power.
It's perfectly split.
Yeah, it's a 50-50. The percentage of people who say that nuclear power is safe is going down every year and is at 47%.
What happened in 2011?
Really? You just discussed about Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, Fukushima accident, and Cleo is asking what happened in 2011? The Fukushima accident happened in 2011. You literally just discussed about it. These plots, first off, don't represent the whole world. This is American votes and views of people in the USA. And yes, of course, they did go down because of the accident. People are afraid. People don't want this to happen, especially in their own countries. However, the numbers are not that dramatic as they might be presented a little bit here, since, as Cleo also mentioned, they are exactly in the middle. And over the course of years, they have been up and down, but on average, around 0.5% of the population supports the use of nuclear and half is a little bit more skeptical about it. So in that case, I would say that it makes sense why it went down from the 2011. Let's hope that with more education and information in the next years, it will start going up again. So I would be curious to see what's after 2019.
That's Fukushima. And it did in me too. Like, I feel this. I feel this association with nuclear power because of these events. This is Japan, and nuclear is in yellow. Right after Fukushima, you see that nuclear power in Japan just gets kind of squashed?
So evidently it gets squashed. It's kind of a little bit of a double-sided argument to say that nuclear accidents happen, but at the same time claiming that it's a bad thing that nuclear got squashed in Japan. It makes sense since the accident happened. People shut down the reactors in Japan in attempts to figure out how they can fix them, how they can make them safer, of course reevaluate the whole use of nuclear. So it's evident that it would take time for them to recover and start using nuclear again, as they do now actually, but it seems that those kind of information are not going to be presented in the video. It's hard to claim or make an argument that it's bad that accident happened, which we all understand, but it's also bad that we don't use nuclear anymore. They are very closely related to each other. The fact that we don't use nuclear, especially in countries like Japan, that accidents happen, is associated with the accident itself. However, now it's been over a decade, and the nuclear industry is increasing in use in Japan, in other countries as well. Some countries are still hesitant, but those numbers are actually getting better and not worse over the course of years from the dates that they stopped showing, so like around the 20s and stuff. Nowadays, nuclear is pretty much blooming in Europe and the US and Asia. There's a lot of construction going on, a lot of new designs, a lot of new technologies that are planned to be employed in the near future. So nuclear doesn't really look all that much doom and gloom at this point in life.
I think for me, the reason why accidents is like the top of this list is because accidents have this big psychological effect on people.
I think we need to separate out, though, risk of accidents, which are terrifying, from safety of an energy source. Because those are actually two different things.
So those actually are not two different things. In my opinion, they're the things that are very closely related to each other. So the risk of an accident and the safety of the source have to be correlated. So for you to claim if a source is safe or not, it depends on the probability of the risk of an accident. So the risk itself doesn't say much, but if you know how probable is the risk of an accident to happen, then that can give you information on how safe the nuclear is. So for example, if a nuclear accident has very severe consequences, but it is very improbable to happen, it's considered a safer option than an energy source that has accidents with a much higher probability, even though they might have lesser consequences, because of the density of the amount of times that the accident happens will actually accumulate to a worse effect or more deaths, let's say, than the nuclear industry would.
Want to know isn't how many accidents happen, it's deaths per unit of electricity production.
Right, this is very important. This is a very important plot. I'm very glad that they bring it up, and it's important to see because people think of the 3 nuclear accidents, the major ones that happened in the world, and they might associate them with very high death rates, and might fear and misconception might be generated because of that. So it's important to actually look at the graphs and put everything into context and see how much each energy production contributes to what is the death toll of each energy production annually per energy that they produce.
So like every electricity source is risky in its own way, and you can measure how many people die based on how much energy you make.
Yes, this is the data for solar, nuclear, wind, and hydropower.
Okay.
So what you can see is...
So basically nuclear is on the very far end, is next to the solar, and the wind power with very, very small number, 0.03. And I assume the fact that they are so close to the beginning of the graph is because probably she's gonna add the fossil fuels and you'll see the number going much, much higher. The hydropower is 1.3, is an order, it's like 1/3 of an order of magnitude higher than wind, nuclear, and solar. This is because of an accident that happened when the hydro dam was being built that actually killed over hundreds of thousands of workers. And let's see about the fossil fuel.
Oh wait, I didn't even see that nuclear was down.
That is fossil fuels. Here's the data that really drove this home for me. So our Walden data, that's the source of the chart that I just showed, did a calculation to really show people how this affects actual humans. So what they did is they set up a town called Euroville. This is a hypothetical town of 150,000 people.
Nice.
So basically they have this very nice demonstrative example, which you can check out in the full video that I'm gonna leave a link to in the description down below. And basically it's kind of a artificial city made out of 150,000 people in the population, and they show you how this city would be affected in terms of death rate by using every energy production source that we have available. So it would be around 28 people or 25 people died because of coal use, something around 18 because of oil, 3 because of gas. 1 person every year would die from hydropower use, and it would take 25 years for 1 person of 150,000 people to die if you would use nuclear power, wind and solar as well, because they are in the same range. So this is a very nice example to put in perspective how dangerous or safe each source that we're using are, and put all of these things into context when we are discussing about using or not nuclear, when at the same time we're heavily relying on a coal-powered energy production that actually it's much more deadlier in a sense in the long run.
I do think that if we really cared about human lives, we would be paying a lot more attention to how many people fossil fuels kill, and we would be trying really, really hard to replace fossil fuels with wind, nuclear, solar, or hydropower as fast as humanly possible.
Exactly. So this is a very nice plot that actually shows that if we are to consider the human factor in the decision about how to go about the energy mix and what energy sources to use, the aim would be to use as many as different energy sources as we have to replace as much of the fossil fuels that we're currently using. Period. That would be the only goal. It would not be discussing between the different renewable energies or sustainable energy sources. It would be trying to bring them all into one basket to fight against fossil fuels.
I think it's that the accidents are just inherently scary in the same way that like a plane crash is scary. It's a spectacle. Yeah.
However, it's quite different, right? So he brings out the example of a plane crash, and it's very relevant. It's usually something that we discuss in the nuclear when discussion about accident comes up. And even though we know that the aviation industry, when it started, there was plenty of deaths until they figure out how to fly planes, what is a safe way to do so, and figure out all the intricacies of the industry. However, now when one gets on a plane, they barely think that they might, let's say, crash on the plane or something bad might happen. Nobody thinks about that, even though the past of the industry is there, which goes to show that the industry has made itself important in our lives. It has demonstrated safety features, and we know we need it, and we use it regardless of the past that was not so easy that led to this stage. It's quite similar with nuclear. The way I see it is that in the past we have accidents which are important to know about and learn from, and nobody takes away the severity of them happening. However, now the main point is to drive the industry with the safety first in mind, for this accident to not be repeated, with new reactor designs that will not even be able to get to this kind of stage to create this kind of accidents to begin with, and try to demonstrate the safety, the efficiency, and the need for nuclear in the world that we are currently living in. And it's quite hard. People don't see it the same way as they see the aviation industry. And it's a mismatch. It makes you think as to what is the difference exactly, because both created deaths from their early development. Aviation created much more than nuclear did. However, we don't see it the same way. So, in my opinion, what really is important is what the industry does and the media does when promoting the nuclear energy, when talking about it, when explaining to the people and to the public how important it is and how much we need it, and how much actual advancement in terms of safety and technological advancement we have done so far. Okay, so they're going through the different types of radiation that you can get from different activities that we do in our daily life, such as getting an X-ray, such as flying on a plane. And not surprisingly, for me, surprisingly, of course, for some people, the fact that you live near a power plant, nuclear power plant, doesn't give out more radiation to the people who live around it compared to the annual radiation that they are already experiencing. It's lower than an X-ray that you would get from going, for example, to the hospital, much, much lower than flying on a plane. Taking a long-haul flight would actually give you much more radiation coming from the cosmic radiation than your presence near a nuclear power plant would.
One thing that we hear a lot about is waste. I saw.
If anything, I would claim that waste is more important in terms of what's to be dealt with nuclear power and what the problem is currently, than accidents, because accidents are in the past. They have not happened ever since. We know why they happened. We have worked hard on not repeating them in the reactors that we are currently employing. However, waste is something that is always with us. There is nuclear waste. It's stored currently in many countries that don't employ geological repositories or any other form of permanent repository as of now. And it is something that it's always discussed when resistance against nuclear comes about. So I would actually switch the order and say first waste, then accidents, and perhaps third cost. Let's see.
A tweet recently from Greenpeace that was like, nuclear energy isn't like viable for the future.
Really? Citing Greenpeace after citing Michael Schneider on a topic about nuclear power, it kind of begs the question as to why. I'm sure there's tweets or information from more objective sources on nuclear power than this. And if this is a tweet of Greenpeace who uses the green glowing goo to represent nuclear waste, goes to show the amount of credibility and scientific information that goes behind this post.
The waste problem is still a thing, and that sort of sent me down this rabbit hole. The first thing I think of is like Homer Simpson and like green goop, like nuclear waste that like never, it's like in a barrel somewhere and it can like sneak out and destroy everyone.
I think one of the things that helps is just to look at what it is. In my imagination, nuclear waste is green goop.
Again,
Nuclear waste is actually a solid pellet. So we are trying to dispose.
it's not. This is not a picture of nuclear waste. It's important to understand the difference. This is a picture of nuclear fuel pellets before they even go inside the reactor. So they are produced now, they're sitting in a bunch in a container, then they will be put in a fuel rod that will be placed in a fuel assembly that will be placed in the reactor. When it comes out of the reactor, the whole fuel assembly is the nuclear waste, except if you are trying to reprocess, then you will start separating the fuel from the rest of the things. But this is not how nuclear waste looks like. So of course, after it's been fissioned, it will look like cracked. It will not look this perfect as it looks right now. Maybe something that looks like this afterwards inside the rod, and not the perfect cylindrical shape itself. It's kind of important why I mentioned that is because when you go and visit nuclear facilities, if they are a factory for fuel fabrication, then you would actually be able to see those pellets up close. So it's important to understand that these are not the spent nuclear fuel, which could quite literally kill you if you were standing next to it, but they are fresh pellets that have not been irradiated yet in any way.
Of a solid material that is extremely radioactive. At most nuclear power plants, we have these, they're called dry casks. So basically, those fuel pellets that look like this go into a column inside a metal rod that's just about half an inch across. And then all of those rods together are bundled into a fuel assembly. Then those are put inside of one of those big casks that you showed. And then they're...
So here we are skipping the step of the actual radiating the fuel, fissioning the fuel. So what happens is the pellet goes inside the fuel rod, which goes inside the fuel assembly, and this is the fresh fuel that will go inside the reactor. Inside the reactor it fissions, and when it comes out, it is in the form of the fuel assembly. It is highly radioactive, and then that is stored in the dry casks. So it's not the pellets themselves that are highly radioactive and then treated to be put in a rod and then in a fuel assembly. They are already in the fuel assembly, so they're not handled in any way by themselves. The fuel assembly as a whole is being stored in these dry casks. I feel there is a little bit of confusion here, maybe from their side, what's the step process.
But what's going to happen next in the long run?
Other countries are doing what's called deep geological storage.
Oh, whoa.
So what you, in theory, want to do is assemble those fuel pellets into those fuel rods, into those canisters, and the canisters are slightly different.
Here again, the fuel assembly is the one that's highly radioactive, that was already assembled by fuel rods, which inside include the fresh fuel pellets that have been fissioning inside the reactor core. Now these fuel assemblies will be put in these copper canisters that will then be put in the underground, be covered with the bentonite clay, and in this whole formation of geological repository. All this information that they provide is actually the Swedish design, so it's the Swedish deep geological repository that has been researched, and there's a lot of work that put into it over a decade of work that now is actually employed in Finland. They have already built that and it will be in operation quite soon. So it's quite nice that they're presenting it here. And yeah, so that's a little bit of a mismatch in the steps of how the fuel ends up there. Other than that, I have no complaints here.
I definitely feel this sense, and I think this is probably a pretty popular reaction to this, which is like, we have this like hot potato and we like need to get rid of it, so we put it in these casks that are only good for 40 years, and then it's like, that's gonna run out, so let's just like bury it in a giant hole and like make it go away, but it's still gonna be there. I think I kind of share the reticence of having an energy source that just continually produces this as a byproduct, even if...
So I have a general comment here to say. So Johnny here goes about explaining on how he feels.
Like, I feel this association. I definitely feel this. I feel like, that's how I feel. See, and actually feel is like this. I feel
about the information presented to him by Clio as of now about the nuclear waste and how it is being treated and how it is being stored as of now. And he starts with the sentence, I feel that, and then he continues, and then he basically ends up saying that he doesn't really like an energy source that produces continuously nuclear waste that is highly radioactive and it's dangerous. It is important, I feel, that as a journalist you portray facts. So what is the work of a journalist, how I see it, is they took 4 weeks of time to research this topic. They went in depth about it. It is important as a journalist for you to present the facts to the public so they don't have to go and do the research themselves about what you found, provide the resources, how they nicely do here, and all the references, period. It is a little bit strange or interesting that journalists give their feeling or their personal take on topics that don't really require them. Let's say no topic requires the personal feeling or the personal opinion of a journalist. That's not journalism, that's blogging. Therefore, in this sense, what he says is wrong. Yes, he might feel that what the nuclear industry is doing is just trying to hide away the waste so they don't see it and they don't feel bad about it, so they put it in a cask that lasts for 40 years and then they were like, what should we do with it? Let's put it underground. This is not why it was made. This is not how the industry operates. And it is wrong, in my opinion, to say, even if you feel that, to say it, if you are a credible source that people go to look for information that is unbiased and it's objective. If this is your opinion, in my opinion, you shouldn't share it. Because you can share your opinion in another setting, but not when you are in the shoes of a journalist who is presenting objectively unbiased such a sensitive topic that the public already has misconceptions and fear about.
This waste, the reason why the waste...
Again, this is not the waste, this is fresh nuclear fuel pellets. They are not activated, they have not been irradiated or fissioned inside the reactor.
Nuclear costs more than everything else. And it's gone up over time. Like, meanwhile, you've got this yellow line, which is solar, and it's just like, there's been so much investment, there's been so much...
Exactly, so he said it himself before I even say it, is that nuclear costs a lot, and there is a reason for that. There is a reason why solar is so cheap, the same way that nuclear is expensive, is where you put your investments, where you put the R&D money, where you develop the technology becomes cheaper. Therefore, we have heavily invested in renewable energies such as solar to reach a point to make them so cheap. If you see how they started in 2009, solar was the most expensive energy source, $359. So in a span of 10 years in this graph, we have dropped it in like an order of magnitude in terms of price. And this is because of the heavily investing in this energy source, in this production technique, manufacturing materials, making everything much more cheap to reach this stage. And this is excellent. This is how every technology basically becomes accessible and becomes cheaper and more affordable. However, with nuclear, we have not done that. Over the past years, this graph basically is around the time that the Fukushima accident happened, and 10 years later, what has happened is no investment, no money for research being put into nuclear energy for it to become more accessible and more affordable. After the accident, people have turned into new types of reactor technologies, into new, safer ways to maintain the reactors that we currently have and make sure that they have, let's say, more diversified safety options in case of an accident. And all of those need research, all of those need development, and all of that needs funding. If there is no funding, then with a very small funding that one does, either from private funding sources or somewhere else, first of all, the technological advancement takes much longer to take place. Second of all, the technology is very expensive. Therefore, he was surprised, but also answered his own question, is that wherever you fund, that's where the price will go down eventually. And unfortunately, this is not happening in nuclear up until 2019 at least, or 18, that this graph is presenting. Currently, at the moment, yes, there is plenty of opportunities and there is a lot of actual interest and plenty of funding that goes into nuclear in several countries in the world. And that is very good to see, because that will drive the cost lower and will make the energy more affordable to be used in different aspects in different countries and for different purposes, not just for electricity production.
And like you mentioned, is always how much do we actually invest in creating these energy sources, in causing this innovation, in causing this price decline. This chart shows government subsidies for various kinds of energy.
Right, I'm glad they show this graph, because here you can see exactly how little funding from the government goes into nuclear energy compared to renewable energy sources. It is orders of magnitude less than what the renewable energies are getting. So evidently, it will be much more affordable to develop and use solar, wind, etc. than it is to use nuclear. You cannot snap your fingers and expect it to become cheaper. You need to invest into it to make it cheaper and then use it.
How much we're investing in each kind of energy versus the amount of energy that that source actually gives us right now, what you see is that nuclear is a little bit less than renewables.
So renewables and nuclear pretty much give out the same energy, primary US energy consumption by source, 8% for nuclear, 11% for renewables, even though renewables are being funded orders or times and times more than the nuclear is, which still gives out a similar amount of energy than the renewables are. So imagine if we actually put out similar funding to what we do for nuclear, for renewables into nuclear, then the percentage of the power production that we would get would be much, much higher and much more efficient than what we're currently having. So they ended up saying that they both agreed that nuclear needs a more fair shot than it's already been given, which I agree as well with. However, what I wanted to see throughout the video, if they would comment on, which I don't see that they are commenting on since this is pretty much the end of the video, is that they mentioned that the three major reasons that they consider to be the problems of nuclear is accidents, waste, and cost. And some of them are quite important, some of them are less important in my opinion. However, what's also very important to me as to what the fish fingers happen to nuclear energy is discussing about the media, the politics aspect of it, and how much influence that had over the people's decision about the use or the phasing out of nuclear. The misconceptions, the propaganda, a lot of blame goes to how the media, how the governments and the countries handled this. And by media, of course, you can extend it to different people that have different purposes, that have different profits to gain out of this, see Greenpeace. And in that, you can also have a lot of journalists that, let's say, didn't do their job properly. So in that case, coming from journalists, I would expect them to perhaps call out nicely their field, which didn't do much credit to the industry itself and didn't do a lot of justice to the whole conversation over the years. It is now very great to see that people are digging into it and are researching about that. However, there is part of the blame and of the reason why nuclear is where it is right now is because the media didn't help at all. The same way they helped other energy sources or any other technological development that has happened over the years. Like, for example, nobody overhyped about the different accidents that resulted in hundreds of deaths from the aviation industry. And that's why now everybody's using the airplane, not really being afraid or even concerned or even thinking about such an accident when boarding a plane. However, media did a lot of negative aspects and display of unfair ways of treating the nuclear energy compared to any other energy in the history of time, in my opinion. Therefore, I would expect that the journalists would be able to see through that. And they didn't, which is quite disappointing, in my opinion. But nevertheless, they discussed some interesting aspects. They dug deep into it. I would expect a little bit more in-depth analysis, to be honest. This information that were presented are quite important, however, could be extracted from a Google search or a few Google searches, so a couple of hours of research could give you this information. I'm not sure how much time was this 4 weeks actually invested into researching or how many people were researching into that. Nevertheless, good effort. So let me know what you guys think in the comments down below regarding the video of Johnny Harris about what happened to nuclear energy. That was my take into it, and I would like to hear your comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe and turn on the bell notification icon. Let me know what you would like me to review next. It's been Elina, your friendly nuclear physicist, and until next time, see you soon.